Welcome to episode 3 of Raise the Bar with me, Daryl LaBar. In this episode, we're going to look at what you have requested, which is Jonas Rappin's Latebound constant generator. How did you request that, you may ask? Well, follow me on Twitter and you'd find out at ddlabar. This is our first code base that actually has a GitHub repository, so I thought I'd walk through just some very basic GitHub 101 on what's involved to download the code, do a review, and submit a pull request. So come with me. Very first mistake people make, at least the mistake that I made, is I immediately went to the repository that I wanted to be at and clicked the clone or download button. What that does is it clones or downloads that branch, which means if you don't have rights to that branch, you can't check your code into GitHub. Not a very good idea. So what you really want to do is click the fork button first. And that'll go through and make a copy, but it'll make it under your credentials. And now you have full control over that. You can pull in the changes that are made in the main fork, or you can submit changes through a pull request to the main fork from your fork. Now once that's done, you can click the clone or download. Now, normally I'd click open in Visual Studio, but for some reason Visual Studio isn't working when I'm actually downloading the code. So I'm going to try open a desktop. This works just fine as long as you have the GitHub client for whatever version of operating system you're running, in my case Windows. Go ahead and open, and it's going to go ahead and ask me if this is where I want to put the actual code on my local machine. Documents, GitHub, Latebound, constant generator, that's fine. I'm going to click clone. Now everything's down there and it's fetched everything and I should be good to go. So that's really all I need to do with the GitHub client currently. I can do everything else from Visual Studio. Now the files are on my machine, I was able to use Visual Studio just to open up the actual solution file. And then I went ahead and downloaded the NuGet packages and did a build just to make sure that my first check, my compile was working, and that going forward, if it doesn't compile, I know it's something that I did. So now that that's done, I'm going to take a few minutes just to review the code, and then we'll pick out something to start looking at. Okay, so the very first thing that I'm seeing in here in the attribute metadata proxy class, very simple, just eliminates some code, and that's you can use the new expression body property here and get rid of all of your gets in here and just use that actual straight, just that expression body, which makes it a little more readable that hey, this is this, and there's no set to it, it's just doing that actual retrieve. So makes it a little bit cleaner. The other thing here that we could take a look at here is property initializers. I like to do collection initializers if I can as well. And so the interesting thing about that is it gets rid of all these comments because it doesn't know what those are. So maybe the comments should go back in there. So let's go ahead and put those back in, I guess. So I actually struggled a little bit here with how to go through and move these around, and I finally figured out the best solution is to highlight everything, move it to the top, and then move my selection down as I'm doing that to change how they're being grouped when I'm moving them. I don't know if the comments are more or less readable because it does break those up, but I do like that we don't have the same beginning prefix for everything. And then here's another one where we can merge or sequential checks here. So before we had, hey, if the value is not equal null, and then we actually do a two-string call on it, well, we can ignore that completely and just use the new coalescing feature. Here's another method we can go through and take a look at. It wasn't immediately obvious to me that this if statement was supposed to apply to these other case statements. And it also has a lot of nesting in here, so I can get rid of both of those things by refactoring this into a separate method. I'll get non-display name. And now, we can move like that. So now I've gotten rid of that big if statement, one if statement less at the very worst, and now I can go through and see that we get the methodological name here and the name here. The other thing I probably will do here is I'm probably going to combine this all in that one call there. Just make it a simple line because I don't need to be setting that same variable twice. It adds anything to readability. Display name, logical name, schema name. Awesome, it returns the name. Now let's take a look at the actual method we created here. Get name non-display name, and that's kind of a dumb name. Get non-display name. How about that? Camel case it. We wrote his own camel case it function. That's interesting. Let's take a look at that. Guessing this is copied from somewhere. No, I don't see a copy from somewhere. Camel case it. Kind of like the name of it. Okay, so he has a word dictionary here. It goes through for each word in words. The last. Okay, I gotta take a little bit to take a look at this. I'll be back. So after looking at this class, I decided I wanted to add some unit testing because, or at least begin to make it unit testable, because right now in its current state, there's really no way to unit test this very effectively or efficiently. There was one method, that was basically it, and that one method was did everything. You gave it everything and it wrote to the disk and didn't really even return a result, so it's very difficult to unit test that. So I'm kind of in the starts of doing that. One other thing I did do is I did create a extension class, and I moved that camel case it to that extension class, since there was no logic in there really that needed to be in the actual C# util class. So I just moved it in there just to make it easier to call, and one less thing going on in that class file at least. So smaller is usually better. You can go extreme, don't go extreme, but that felt like a good thing to do there. So what I've done is I decided to create a new interface here, iConstantFileWriter, because what I noticed is that you have two options. You can write it all to a single common file, or you can write it all to separate distinct files, unique files, one for each entity. And he had a couple if statements, and the if statements were doing completely opposite things. One was writing to a string builder, the other one was writing to the file, and then they switched after this for each statement here was done. They'd switch and do the other way, where one would actually write all the files and the other wouldn't write anything, would just display a message. So in order to simplify that, I just changed those things into two different methods, write entity and get complete message. And this is going to be the actual interface then that I'm going to look to define. So if I go to the get complete message, so here we have that one get comment file. So one of them is going to do this, the other one's going to do that, but they're both going to return a message. So for the starts, I'm just going to take this as my actual start here. And my interface. Okay. That's one method I need to implement. The other method is the write entity method. So one case, this actually will go through and actually do the actual work of writing to the disk and the write entity, and the other one will actually write it to a string builder. So I'm guessing I'm probably not going to need that string builder one, but let's go ahead and look at what we need to implement each one. So if I go back to I'm using Control- again to try to find out where I'm at. If I go back to the get complete message here, let's actually move to the very first one, the write entity. So if it's the common file, I've created a common file writer, and that's going to implement the iConstantFileWriter. Implement the missing members, yes. That's actually the wrong method. This is that one since it's doing it alphabetically. Let's get the other option for that. Oh, another thing I failed to mention is Jonas did have a not symbol in here and flipped that over, which makes it less readable in my opinion. So I just removed that as well, but now I'm getting rid of it entirely, so yay. And let's go and implement the other class as well, separate files. Okay. And here, okay, so this is the separate file writer. So it writes a separate file. Each time you write the entity, it writes a file. Yay! And that message is being, what is that message being doing in here? Okay, I just copied in the wrong thing there. Alright, so we've got a write file error. That's something we'll have to handle here. I think that's it. So when I'm in the separate one, each time I write the entity, I actually write to the file, then I return save files, and then I list the save files. Great. When I do the common file writer, and this could be a scary part when you're refactoring, is I've got all these errors. Hopefully I can fix them all. Don't be too scared. You'll get there. Here, and I'm writing it, I actually write to the string builder, and then I return that. Okay, so that's all good. So let's go ahead and take a look at our write file, because that's something that we need in this other class. So rather than in our C# util, write file needs to be somewhere else. Pass in the file name, content, org URL, and settings. I'm calling it beautified content. Again, I think these could be all extension methods. public. So I'm going to change this to just a struct. Just because that way I know what the templates are that I'm dealing with outside the file. Fix all those errors. Oh, file. And actually, I don't want template any of these names either. Just duplicate, template. Doesn't make sense. There we go. Let's go back to our extensions, fix that. And I think this is backwards. I'm at the content right that way. So I need to make sure I fix that. So I'm guessing we probably don't even need that as well, but let's go through and do this here. So now we can just create our new builders based on what the actual settings are. So our file writer equals common file, and then if it's common file, then new common file writer, else new separate file writer. And really ideally, that comes from an actual input parameter. Then whatever this broke, well, let's finish this. So this is file writer dot write entity. This is our stuff, and this is file writer dot get complete message. And then this will fail because this is that. Okay, this is a serializable class, but it doesn't mean you can't add your own properties to it. So public get file writer. This returns an file icon. Just call that writer. There we go. So I just need to cast one of those so it knows that it is that constant file writer we're using. So now in our file here, cool beans. Alright, so that should resolve that issue. Okay, so now our generate classes goes through, gets the actual entity, and then calls the right entity. So now we need to worry about what don't we need in here. I don't think we need these entities passed in because we're not using it anywhere except inside there. So I'm going to remove the entity, that string builder entirely. Make our life a little simpler. So the common file is one that actually needs it. String builder. Okay. Alright, so now I can go to here and remove my string builder from both of these calls just to simplify things up a little bit. What else can we remove from this thing? We need to pass in the entity information. Do these things use the entity metadata at all? Does just get the actual technical name. Does the other one use that? No. So ideally, if we don't pass in, well, it doesn't use any of this stuff. Save files. Yeah, let's get rid of save files next. There we go. So after looking at quite a bit of code and working through and trying to manipulate it, I've at least got one working unit test. So I should go ahead and run the unit test just to see kind of what we got here. Basically, I'm giving in an empty entity here and asserting that it should go through and create the actual logical name here, public const string entity name Uber entity. So that's all that's really doing. And I just want to probably look through and do the differences of what I've done and how the actual test works probably. So for the test here, I ended up using FakeItEasy. I've never used it before, but I know that Jordan Montana uses it for his faking framework, so I figured I'd give it a shot just to see what it would do, and it was all right. There's some things that it was kind of annoying that I figured out how to do, but you know, for being free, it's not bad at all. So in this test here, the first thing that we're going through and doing is just setting up all of our data. So I probably should have done the arrange, act, and assert. We're going through and actually arranging all the data, so we are basically needing to populate the parameters to send into this generate classes. I've got it down to just the values, which is our metadata that's getting sent in, the settings, and then the actual, this fake writer. And I will explain that if I haven't already, so later. But basically what goes on is I'm first getting my metadata set up, and I get set up and I'm passing an Uber entity as my logical name. And then I'm creating new settings, initializing them, and then writing a new fake writer. And so this is an actual fake using the FakeItEasy. That's taking the interface and say, just grade me one of those. And when it actually gets called with this method signature, and I just say with any arguments, I don't care what arguments, then I evoke this method. And basically all I'm doing is I need to get that entity out. I don't care what the settings are, I don't care what the file name is, I just want the entity out. And so that's creating a closure around that entity, and then we can access that after we actually do our call on our test here. And we can make sure that it must have happened and assert that it actually exists. So if I put a breakpoint here and run that again, we can see what our actual entity looks like. And we can see in our test initialization here that we have some sort of issue with this. This should, if we were going to be pretty printed, it should be moved over and tabbed over, but it's not currently. So, so that's something that either I broke, or that's the way it is when you are passing in metadata that doesn't make any sense. This metadata isn't valid metadata you'd get from an actual return from CRM. So, you know, could be one or the other. But that's all working. So let's go ahead and look at the changes that we've made for this. So our attribute metadata proxy class, I just removed all those gets and made them just straight initializers. This went through and changed it from properties add to just an actual collection initializer. So it looks like a lot of changes. Really nothing got done here. So here's the change where we went through and we split that out into a separate method. And in that method we did the actual work that we needed to do in there that was separate, so we didn't have that weird if statement there that was there before. So I'm going to look at the I guess we look at the common file writer. So this is the actual common file writer. And in here, all we're doing basically is saying, all right, when you're writing entity, write it to this string builder. And when it's done, we're going to go ahead and write that out. That whole string builder is going to get written out. It's going to be very similar but different to the separate file writer, which this one actually, each time you write the file, writes the file, and then at the end it just gives you a list of files. So then if we go back to our main method, main thing that we were actually going through and changing here, this C# utils. So we've trimmed it down from 293 lines down to 176, which is fairly decent. I could do it even more by removing this align splitters, but I'll let Jonas figure out if he needs that or doesn't need that. I combined all of the templates into an actual template struct just to make it easier to not pollute the actual C# utils namespace, basically. So that's just something that I preferred, but hey, you can change it back, it's not going to hurt anything. Now our generate classes actually returns back a string, which is the message, before we return the message here as an actual message box, which for testing purposes is no bueno. So rather than returning void, I actually return the message, and then the caller then can do whatever they want to with the message. So just removing a coupling there. You'll notice here that we've removed all these initializers here. Since these are now actually in the actual classes themselves, we don't need those. And basically loops through each of these things and creates that one, or calls that get name technical and calls that write entity, and then calls the get complete message. So that logic's been extracted out into those separate writers, file writers basically. We've moved the beautify content and the write file to extension methods as well, since they really weren't doing much that was dependent within this class. And I think that's all that we got. I'll try a quick little couple seconds here to see if I see anything else. So I went through, there wasn't really anything else that I've done that was worth mentioning. This is probably, without actually talking first about the changes I'm making, this is probably too large of a check-in to do normally. If you're going to be doing a lot of changes, it's always good to talk to the actual owner of the repository first. Say, hey, I'm thinking about doing this, what do you think? And then making smaller commits probably than what I've done here, but this is just a good getting started point, just to add some unit testing to this project. So now that that's all done, I went through and added some comments here about what I did. Added a test project, moved some logic, created some. There's still more work that needs to be done if there wants to be more testing. Ideally, to be able to have better tests, more tests at the very least, and better tests for that C# utils class. And we never actually looked at the form yet and the actual plugin itself, but most of that logic is actually in that C# util. The rest of it's just interacting with the form. So I can maybe look at the next time, but at least for now, that's where actual logic is actually at. So, and that's about it. So I'm going to go ahead and commit all my changes here. And again, if you're new to GitHub, that just saves into my local computer. So then I actually need to sync them up to the repository. And so that's going to do that push to push it up there. And now that that's done, I can go back and do a push. Okay, and I'm going to do a new pull request, which basically says, hey, here is code that I've changed. Go ahead and decide if you like it or don't like it. It does check to make sure it's able to merge. Slight refactor for raise a bar episode. And then I will go ahead and create a pull request. So now that will notify Jonas, hey, I created a pull request, and he can decide if he likes it or doesn't like it. It's up to him. It doesn't bother me at all. But if he wants to at least have some unit testing started, it's a good point to start for. And you can do this for about any project. They probably, I don't have any projects I'd be like, you know what, I really don't want to have unit testing on that project. So that's an option to do that. And it's fairly easy to just go through and grab the code, check it out, download it, edit it, and then submit a newer version that's slightly cleaner than what the old one was before. So hopefully you enjoyed this Raise the Bar episode. Please like, add comments. I wanted as much discussion as possible. There's things I know I've missed, and there's things that I definitely could do better. Maybe even Jordy could comment on my use of FakeItEasy. There, hopefully next time I will either spend a little more time looking at this, or hopefully do a plugin of some sort. So for the actual CRM itself. So that's what I've got. Thank you for joining me. And I hope that you learn to raise your own bar in this episode as well. Thank you.